In the mid-70s, I think maybe 75, you can check out the date if you're interested in the exact date on Noam Chomsky's site. I read one of his interviews where he proposed that there is a universal grammar that is inbuilt in us and that enables every person to learn languages, and not just one, or not just special ones, but all of them. And so this was the question he got. So, we are faced with the mystery. How could anyone possibly learn enough about the English language to possess the rich and exotic grammatical knowledge that we all seem to possess by the time we are 5 or 6 years old? And then he replied, there is an obvious answer to that. The knowledge is built in. You and I can learn English as well as many other languages, as well as any other language, with all its richness, because we are designed to learn languages based upon a common set of principles which we may call universal grammar. And then he continued that interview, and the next question was, what is universal grammar? He replied, it is the sum total of all the immutable principles that heredity builds into the language organ. These principles cover grammar, speech sounds, and meaning. Put differently, universal grammar is the inherited genetic endowment that makes it possible for us to speak and learn human languages. So he proposed this, the existence of this human language, or this universal grammar, and then he invested great effort in finding it and analyzing it. I didn't follow up completely because I kind of know that he has not found it. Reason why I know this, because since the 70s I have learned languages, and none of the languages, and I learned these languages different areas and different ways, and none of these languages was taught to me by such a thing as a universal grammar, or around it, or in any way connected to it. So it has not been discovered by him, and there are reasons why. All right. Reason number one, because he doesn't speak Hungarian. And reason number two, because of that, he has no way to adequately research the Nostratic language and its structure. And then reason number three is because he mistakenly believes, like nearly every linguist on the planet, there may be a few exceptional ones with a bit of a sharp sense, but he also mistakenly believes that the language, the science of the language is its grammar, and it is not. And now let's put this in the right perspective. He was talking about something that is inbuilt in us. He mentioned in the speech organ by heredity and all that. And then that's obvious that he was looking for something that was there before language. And then comes language. We invent language. And then only we invented grammar. So grammar is the man-made pseudo-explanation of a language, and looking at something hereditary, something universal in the man-made aspect of a language, which is different for each language. So that suggests that it will be a futile effort to try. And as we can see, his example proved that, because he have not found it yet. Now, to explain how a universal system works that governs all languages, first we have to clear the misconception about grammar. And I have to force myself not to say my opinion about grammar, because it's really, really not nice. And I try to be objective about it and stick to the facts. Okay, fact number one. In Europe, there was the Latin era. Everybody spoke Latin, and regional languages kind of had a secondary role in the society, or at least among intellectuals. They could all communicate in Latin, but that era came to an end, and people became more interested in learning each other's languages, and then they faced a problem because every language was a very different system, and they thought they could explain this somehow and then facilitate the learning of the language. And then grammar came about. I don't know who invented the first one, maybe from Germany somebody. But the German grammar was made by Grimm, I think. What was his name? Jacob Grimm, I think. He made the German grammar, and then probably, but I'm not sure about this, based on that other nations thought that it's very useful and they made their own. Now, one thing we must clearly state: in grammar that came out of language is not, and it is not language that was built on grammar. Okay, that's one thing. Second thing is that grammar doesn't explain the language. Grammar doesn't explain anything. Grammar just states the fact which we can see from the language itself. So therefore grammar is very unnecessary from every point of view. Grammar has one merit, is that it came up with a terminology that made it possible to speak with ease about languages, because it grouped words like adjective and adverb and this and that. He made this grammar made this terminology, and then it's easy to discuss languages. That's its only merit. But for someone who wants to learn a language, as a foreign language or second language, grammar is completely useless. Grammar has only any use when there is no other explanation for the language or whatsoever. But that's not the merit of grammar. It's just that it fills the curiosity of the student with pseudo answers, and then at least the student's own mind does not disturb him in his study. But the student never gets the answers to the big why. Why this, why that? No. A grammar only can explain how things are done, but not why. Okay. Then, grammar is a man-made explanation of a system that is already there. There is no grammar before language, and that's why you don't have a grammar floating around without a language created yet. However, there are artificial languages, and that may be that they took a set of grammar and a language that came with it, and then somewhat they changed it and created a new language, and voila, that's the Slavic language, because the Slavic tribes in the olden days, they had their own distinct languages, and then they created a so-called Slavic mother tongue. And these Slavic languages somehow became unified. Okay, so that was a conscious effort. And then probably Latin was a somewhat conscious effort for some time, and so on and so on. So not all languages are natural, but in general they are not grammar based. The first model on which language was based, I will start, is physics. Language models the observable universe, and sometimes more than that. Now, how is physics present in the language? Well, scientists already agree that the material universe is a kind of densified energy, or the physical matter is energy whose vibrations are slowed down so much that it appears unmoving and solid to our senses. And this material universe, according to them, is made up of 6 leptons and 6 harder substance they call quarks. So that gives us 12 types of crystals and materials that exist, basic materials that we probably it's a molecular structure or something, I don't know. But there are 6 that they identify, and these 6 they all have their antimatter, and that gives us 24. Now, this solid thing, they are in the form of energy or vibrations. They are like the vibration that vibrates between 2 points, like the string of a guitar, for example. Yeah, these vibrations that this solid matter is not going anywhere, they stay, and that's why to us the solid material world appears to be the same every day when we look at it. And then when we imitate the nature of these 24 solids, then we get the consonants in our language. When we strike the vocal cord, and let's say we say g, t, b, these are the consonants. And then these 24 solid matters would not make up anything meaningful to us or useful to us if there were not 7 energies that ties them down. So they are like the different glue for these 24 to form anything that we can work with. And of course these 7 energies also have their opposites, and that gives us 14. And when we imitate the nature of these energies, and we start at one point and endlessly we vibrate our vocal cords, then we get the vowels like oh, ooh, ooh, this kind of sounds. So these 2 groups of physical existence gives the very foundation of our language, and that is the consonants and grammar. Now, only the Hungarian language still today has 24 consonants and 14 vowels. And of course, when you look at these alphabets online and dictionary and all that, our alphabets are all contaminated with all kinds of rubbish, but it's very easy to distinguish which is a Hungarian letter and which is not, because basically in a language, if you don't have a word that starts with a specific letter, then it's not your letter. So if all the foreign words, for example, that starts with Q, none of them are Hungarian, then Hungarian language doesn't have the Q sound or X and these kind of things. So this way we can still establish the original Hungarian ABC. Okay, then so this is how physics frame the language. And another aspect is a Doppler effect. You know that, okay, let me write. I put the vowels on the whiteboard and you will see. Vowels in the Hungarian language, there are high and low in equal numbers. That means 2 groups of 7. And what the Doppler effect is, you have to know is that it states that when you approach the source of a sound, then you hear that sound going up. And when you pass the source, it's going down like this. And very easy to observe this when you see broadcasting programs or at the highway, you just see the cars passing by. Don't even have to see the Formula 1 on TV. When they come, the sound's going up. When they leave you, the sound's going down. The Hungarian vowels, high vowels are E, I, U, U. These are the high ones. And then the low vowels are the A, O, U. Before I mentioned that we have 2 groups of 7 vowels, and the 2 groups is because of the long and short. As you see, all the 7 vowels we have basically long and short one. However, the first of the high and the first of the low are 2 distinctly different vowels. You have to position your speech organ differently to pronounce E and A, O and A. And the reason why these 2 are different is later when I explain astronomy as the system on which the language is built. Remember this. These are the summer solstice and the winter solstice in the language. These things, because the letters have corresponding planets, and these are not, the solstices are not the planets, but nevertheless they have great influence on the human mind and the lifestyle of the early people. They still follow this. So that's the reason, and the rest of them is just long and short of the same vowel. So as you see, it's 2 groups of 7. Now, why we need to mention this? There is a Latin phrase. It goes something like "Demon est Deus inversus," if I pronounced right. But it means God is the devil inverted. Now, I don't know who came up with this, but that guy probably was a brilliant mind. What we need to know about it is that it's probably, the reason why it's written in Latin, because probably it wasn't Hungarian who invented this, because in Hungary it's in our language, the meaning of all this. And this is where the Doppler effect comes in, you see. Now, you have to know that in a language, in the words, the consonants carry the meaning of the words, and the vowels, they give the soul of the words, the soul to the words. Now, because of this, if a language is well made, such as the Hungarian, then you can replace in any sentence you want, you can replace all the vowels with whichever you want. And you say the whole sentence with, let's say, only a vowel, and we still understand what you speak, but we laugh at you because you sound funny. But from the structure and the consonants, we understand your meaning. So, meaning is carried by the consonants. Now, we have H, T, and N. If we put high vowels into that, so it becomes ish, ten, and this becomes a God. That's how we say God, Ishten. Ishten, and if, according to the Doppler effect, if we don't approach this source of energy or source of life, but we distancing ourselves from this, and then based on our behavior we replace the vowels with low vowels, and then we put sha, tan, then it becomes the devil. But it's basically the same entity, but which side of it we experience depends on which way we go. And this our language tells us, for the Hungarians. For the Latin-speaking people, they had to come up with a whole set of, probably a whole set of philosophical discoveries to get there. For us it was not necessary, because it's in the language. And this is the way, for example, how the Doppler effect works. Now, Doppler effect, not always, but often is used in the Hungarian language for distance. Closer distance are with the high, and the further distance is with the low sound. Time, before is with the high, and then low sound indicates something after something. Also, we have positivity. Concepts like nice and beautiful and all that, where you have all the high vowels, and then ugly and other undesirable words where you have all the low vowels. And then we have indication of size. Tichi means small, and noj means big. So the low sound is the bigger, and the smaller the size is, higher we say, higher vowels. It's probably is from the drum. Bigger drum sounds has a deeper sound, so the size had to be indicated by low vowels. Another aspect of physics is the light. Now, scientists already agree that the light has two natures. One is that it's a particle, and the other one is that it's a wavelength. And they don't quite understand how these two can come together, but they understand it has this dual nature. Now, this is represented in the Hungarian language by the consonants. We have 12 voiced and 12 unvoiced consonants. These two groups representing the dual nature of the light. And so just like the light, sounds or words can have dual nature as well. A light, you see, is an action, is a vibration that spreads. And this aspect of it in our language corresponds to the verbs. And then the static aspect of it, being a particle, a fixed material if you want, is corresponding to the nouns. And therefore in the Hungarian language, I see my notes for you to not to wait too long until I remember all this. So in the Hungarian words you have words that can be both verbs and nouns. Now in the English also you have like swim and the swim, or run and the run, or this kind of thing. But this is not what I say. The English version is alright. It's a kind of impoverished version of what the Hungarian language still had and what the original language had. Now, for example, the word dob, it means to throw, but it also means a drum. So the throw and the drum have no relation to each other, right, in their meanings. So in this way we have several words representing the dual aspects of life, light. For example, fail is to be afraid, and it also means a half. Mule is to stretch out your arm or reach out, and it also means a rabbit. Egg is to burn, and it also means the sky. Fall is to eat, and it also means a wall. Fog is to hold, and it also means a tooth. Now, fei, it means to milk a cow, for example, and it also means a head. Al is to stand or the chin, and a few more, but it's not necessary for you to know it all. Just understand it exists, and in these forms you see physics in the language. So that's about the physical system, the system of physics in the language. Now, the same way there are others, namely astronomy, pictography, geometrics, music, biology, and linguistics differences that I have discovered. And just a few words about each of them. Physics we already analyzed. Astronomy is the connection between language and astronomy is also in its vowels and consonants. You see, the Hungarian language has 24 vowels, 24 consonants. 24 consonants goes around the zodiac 2 rounds. And when you go and you start at spring, where the year originally started, and you start writing in sequence the Hungarian consonants, 1 round and 2 rounds, you get 2 by 2 each constellation, and you can form words with those consonants that relate somehow in a distant logic, sometimes quite closely to that astrological sign. And secondly, like the Greeks tried before, it was experimented with the Hungarian language as well, that you write clockwise 1 round, and then when you complete it you write anti-clockwise the other round, and then still in the Hungarian language you can find words that you can make with those different consonants pairs and relate to that astrological sign. So then pictography, the principle behind pictography is that there are groups of consonants that you form by positioning your speech organs the same way. And then, so consonants are divided into these groups, and then the way you position your speech organs create pictures in our mind, like this angle, sharp angle, obtuse angle, round, and this kind of pictures. And then with these lines you can make pictures, and you find this all over in the Hungarian traditional embroidery and all that. And then with these names and the consonants relating to them, you can tell the names of what you draw with. And this is the basic of pictography. Of course there is more, and then through pictography they can analyze pictures on artifacts, that we find in ancient tombs and all that, and then the ancestors can talk to us through those pictures and can tell us how they lived and whatever they think they want to tell. So that's pictography, also present in today's Hungarian language still. Then there is geometrics. So geometrics of our language came from a Hungarian linguist, Dr. Balla Zoltán, who wrote a book, and he explained that there is sensory data for concepts, but sometimes the concepts are so distant from the sensory data that we can no way relate the two together. For example, if you want to explain to me the meaning of care through something that I see, good luck. You're not going to make me understand that concept or anybody else, because it's so distant. And then he argues that the sounds that were used in the original language and in the Hungarian language are still used. They have geometrical implications. So sounds have a kind of meaning in nature, what we experience and what we can see. For example, just to give you one example, L is a continuity. L is the sound of continuity, right? E is the sound of pointedness, sharp point, and that's why in English still is there when you say here. It's here, it's pointing out. And in Hungarian also it means it. And for example, when you strike two stones together, you get the hard k sound. And therefore stone in Hungarian language is a k. Okay? And then many others. And then the geometrical implications or geometrical meaning of the words that we use are still, closely related to the concepts that we form in a language. And from there you can much better determine what those people who formed the language kind of wanted to mean or say. Okay? Music needs no explanation. The pentatonic scale of music originated from the Carpathian Basin, and then archaeologists unearthed a flute which is 30,000 years old, and only the Hungarian people, the Magyars, used it. You have to insert your tongue in it, otherwise it's just a tube with 3 holes and is made of a bone. And so there was music at that time, and there was language also, and no need further explanation. Some other languages retain the musical elements much better than the Hungarians. Let's say Italian, maybe Arabic, and Hindi is very musical also, and so on. And then we have biology and linguistics. Now, and these two is what I want to explain a bit more in detail. Now let us consider the biological aspect of the Hungarian language. It resembles to a tree, and if you know someone who studied Sanskrit, he will also tell you that Sanskrit is also like a tree, and the structure of these two languages are quite the same. And in fact there are hundreds, someone counted about 800 Hungarian words in Sanskrit, about 4,500 in ancient Greek, and a few hundred in Tamil, and every language has something that the Hungarian language has as well. But where in the world these just appear random, in Hungary it forms a whole, a complete whole, a system. And the only logical conclusion we can draw from this, that those elements that you find in other parts of the world were transported from the Carpathian Basin out and not the other way around, because it's impossible that the people went outside and they collected the thousands of words from here and from there and different continents and then came back to the Carpathian Basin just to form a language out of it. Impossible. So the very basic, very beginning of the Hungarian language is based on something that is called the jök. Jök means something very basic, and if I put air, which is the blood vessel, it becomes gyökér together, and it means a root, because the root is the most basic blood vessel of whatever living organism lives through it or on it, okay? And the jök is usually a consonant, vowel, consonant. At least for the last 10,000 years, it's been like that. Consonant, vowel, consonant. So it's a C, V, C. Consonant, vowel, consonant. And you see, when you analyze, for example, the jök kör. Kör, it means a circle. Yeah? So, like I explained in the part of pictography, that consonants are grouped based on how you position your speech organs. So consonants can take any consonants within the group, and the jök will not change its meaning. It will be recognizable. Of course, the vowels, whatever vowels you want to put there, the jök will not be altered. And these jöks form concepts. These jöks start the word and then, or makes part of the word and then something more, and that is how we form concepts. Now, the concepts are made of jöks, and so for all that we have, we can say probably we have a good 20 or 25 jöks that comes from only a handful of basic jöks that makes up the roots. The trunk of the tree is the solid basis of the language, which is those concepts that made of the jöks and can never change. Now, the most basic jöks are mal, gur, ro, ne, har. Mal refers to everything that disintegrates. Gur refers to everything that bends. Ro is everything that spoils the wholeness or the oneness of something. Ne refers to anything that expands, grows, or becomes. And har is something that emerges or breaks out of somewhere. Okay, so these are the most basic jöks. And the rest of the 2025 came later because we needed to make concepts, but the use of the jök is the most basic thing in the language, and then when we form concepts, we don't throw this away, we just continue what we have to do. Now, one thing you must understand, these are the visible occurrences of the physical universe to human being. That means that whoever made this language noticed this, knew this, and understood this. And not even one time you will find that anything that disintegrates will start with har. Never. And anything that emerges or breaks out will never start with ro. So these things are never mixed up. The jokes are so distinctly different from one another that it is impossible that an unintelligent being just walked about the planet and then named things random without any understanding of the world. So these are the basic jokes, but there are more later on because of the vocabulary we needed more, and that's how we come back to 2025. And so the jokes make a joke family. For example, there can be another joke made of row, a few more, and then because they all belong to row, they become a joke family. Okay, so these jokes make the concepts. How do they make a concept? How do they make concept? Let's say chill. C-N-S-I-L, chill. Okay, let's analyze this one. Csillog, it means to glitter in Hungarian. Csillam means, Csillár is a chandelier. You know that the chandelier was made of crystal and it was blinking, glittering all the time. It's csillár. And then csillog, already said, csillam. Csillam is when you look at the water of a river and then it glitters, and that's what you see, that's a csillam. And then if you change the ch with v, then it becomes villog. Villog is same as csillog, but csillog is a permanent glittering. Villog is occasionally. Okay. From there comes villam. Villam is a thunderstorm, the flash, and then occasionally just you see it. Then from there you see the thunderstorm is like this, right? So this shape becomes a villa, which is a fork. And then if you combine that with iron, then it's wash villa. It's a pitchfork. Yeah. And so you can see how from one thing with logical abstractions you can make concepts, and then so the Hungarian words they have families, and that is why we can always see the origin, despite the fact that our educators back in Hungary, they try to lie about it, because there are words here and there, Slavic languages and this language, Turkic and all that, but the same things you find there one by one. But again, that kind of concept or that kind of word has a bush-like environment of similarities with other words around it, so it is evident that which was there first. Now, then the language progresses through the development of prefixes and suffixes, and this is where the language branches out into infinite possibilities, just from a few jokes, making concepts, and prefix and suffix makes innumerable possibilities for a language to be formed. And with a few words, I read somewhere that the Hungarian words has a 57,000 vocabulary, and the English has about 300,000. English has many words because English doesn't have jokes, so everything they see, they give a new word for it, or they go back into Latin or Greek and then they form something out of that to pretend that these kind of concepts have been used in English for a very long time. Yeah, but so they name things individually, but in Hungarian with the prefixes and suffixes, that 57,000 becomes 2.5 billion. And of course we don't use all that. We don't use all those words because at this moment we don't need them, so many of those don't make any sense to us, but a few millions is possible that we can understand some meaning out of them. And then what is important to know, that this language still have empty rooms for us to go with. This language doesn't have to change itself when something new happens, because this language by its own structure is able to deal with any kind of change in the environment and adapt to it. And it still has room for that, and don't have to change the language, change the grammar, or change anything in it. Okay? So from the prefix suffixes we have those very old words, very Hungarian words that will always be there. And then we have, these are the younger branches of the tree. The prefixes and suffixes are the thicker branches. And then the individual leaves are these so-called new words that come into the language and go also, because they're not connected to the system. They come, stay for a while, and then wither. So this is how the biology of the language looks like. Now, why is this important to us? Well, because I want to explain about the universal linguistic platform. And this illustration will make it easier to understand. Alright, so this is the language we have. Now, the language is a system for the consciousness to express its experiences in the real world. And what is the real world? Reality for every conscious being is the realm of things where its life happens. There is no other reality for that. Yeah? For that conscious being. Now, for us is this world. And so, you see, we can say that all this is the expression of the world. This is the world, and then through language we express that, okay? And then, who is that speaks? And who is that trying to understand the world? So here we have consciousness. We have consciousness. So consciousness thinks and acts and tries to understand what is out there. But you see, if you cut the tree, it will die. If you create a language, let's say like Western languages, that they are not connected to anything. They are like floating systems, not connected to consciousness in any way. So that language will suffer in its internal logic, and it will lose the ability to completely express the observable universe. And more than that, such a language is the way of thinking in the wholeness of the world. But once you create a floating bubble kind of language here that is not connected to anywhere, then you stop thinking. You have just no way, because these kinds of languages are basically based on a profound dishonesty. I don't want to go into that, but that is where it comes from. And profound because it's really not conscious, it's an unconscious or subconscious thought, and dishonesty because it doesn't fit with what the person experiencing when he speaks. Okay, now, so this kind of languages makes the person think in terms of I, opposed to them. It doesn't think in the terms of us. Okay, so people and nations who speak this kind of languages, they should not lead, because like many times we have seen the West, when it leads the progress of humanity, that means this era is heading to the dead end. And the West has no way to renew itself, because its language doesn't allow that mind to renew things. Okay, that mind has no avenue to go with the things. All right, so consciousness is trying to understand the world, is using a linguistic system for that. Yeah, because consciousness needs a language to think in. Without language, consciousness cannot expand. It's only within the boundaries that consciousness can, within the boundaries of language, consciousness can expand and understand the world. Okay, so there is language. And then what we are interested in is this part, this here. We have the language, but this surface below which is consciousness in our mind. Yeah? This is the universal linguistic platform. Now what is this? This thing is the tool of consciousness, and it is a part of the mind. Why consciousness needs the tool? A tool, because consciousness can only do one thing, to become conscious of something, to understand something. But to process data, consciousness cannot do it. Consciousness has the mind to do it. But the mind is already very broad, and it has many functions. So, for the mind to process linguistic data, it needs a set of confines within which it can process it. And then in this way, the mind doesn't have to use all its faculty, just whatever is necessary for understanding and processing linguistic data. Alright? So, I make some space here. So the mind does not participate full-fling in whatever it's analyzing, because it's too big. Yeah? The mind needs a mental sphere, an enclosed mental sphere that is able to process the relevant data. And that mental sphere always comes with limitations, and then within that, within the limitations, that mental sphere is allocated or used for that kind of information to be processed. Now, in terms of music, what can that system be for the mind through which consciousness can understand? That's very simple. You have to limit the extent of what we are dealing with. So if on one side you have all that the ear can hear, limited by all that the vocal cord can produce, then within that mental space, music is possible to understand and handle and process. And then, of course, inside there are many musical systems that you can develop: Carnatic music, Arabic music, pentatonic scale, whatever musical system you want. But for the mind to completely understand it, have to have this first, because whatever music exists outside of this, the mind has no way to understand. Okay, why does the mind need this? Because the mind basically does one thing, takes the form of what it is contemplating. So, for example, if it's languages, then here we have whatever we can think, limited by whatever our language can say. And then this, we have the universal linguistic platform. And then within this, we develop languages. And how do we do that? Now, when a language is learned, then a part of this ULP takes the form of that language. And the more is practiced and the more is learned, the more this ULP takes the shape of that language, takes the form of it, and then the mind can understand. The ULP takes the form of that language, and then that language can be mastered. Now what happens if the person learns in a confusing manner? Then the ULP is unable to take the shape of that language, because for that it's important that language classes pass on a general understanding of the language, and then when details are taught in the classroom, then through the details the ULP is unable to understand it, and it takes a very long time until the person learns enough details for the universal linguistic platform of our mind to kind of conceptualize the totality of that language. And when someone follows the nature of this universal linguistic system, then the basic difference between anybody else who does not follow that in his learning of a language is that from day one, what the classes are doing is shaping the universal linguistic platform by the language that the person is using. So it is not like you have a memory, you go to school and then you learn the lessons all separated, you know, one day after the other, you learn the lessons all separated, and then from here you still have to make a language on your universal linguistic platform. That is the wrong approach, because that takes a lot of effort and a lot of time. So why we need this? So that this connects the language to consciousness. Because language is a property of the mind. Consciousness is the entity that understands it. But need a tool that both can work with, and that is the universal linguistic platform. Whatever the mind orders, the universal linguistic platform takes its shape, and in the form of linguistic expression, the consciousness is able to understand. And then think, and then reverse the process, and then tell the mind what to do, how to process whatever is there to process. That is the universal linguistic platform. And so there is such a way, such a thing as wrong language education. If a student wants to learn a language by making his ULP work, that means like a child that gets a linguistic data and then the ULP would integrate it into previously learned aspects of the language, then it is very important that student is presented with an integrated system of teaching the language, and that necessitates the whole language to be symbolized. You see, if you want to memorize all there is there in the field of mathematics without mathematical formulae, just by exercises, you can never do it. There are so many. But if you manage to memorize all the possible mathematical formulae, then we can say that you have acquired the knowledge of mathematics. So it's the same with the language. When you symbolize the language, then there will be a limited set of patterns. And then once the person memorizes that, then the person will have the language constructed on his universal linguistic platform and able to use at the same time. Because that person does not only work his memory. You see, no matter what you store in your memory, whatever linguistic data you want to store, and how much you want to store does not really matter, because memory does not process language. It is your ULP that processes it for the mind to deal. Alright? So now, two more things I want to explain. You see the complexity of a language, and you can clearly understand that this was not formed on grammar. And then I want to tell you what grammar is. I don't want to tell my opinion, but I want to make you see what grammar is. Now, see, grammar that cannot explain origins. So grammar comes in where complication starts. So grammar explains from here, not exactly all of it, but some, and this is grammar. Grammar. Okay, so this is grammar, and then if you want to learn a language through grammar, you can just never conceptualize the whole of it. I mean, it's a useless, it's a futile effort. Okay, that's about grammar. Now, what we have to understand is that such a language, to develop, there had to be a time, a very, very long time, when for these people to develop this language, it was prosperous and safe. Otherwise, such a complex and such a big system could not have been developed. And it also explains, this system also explains why we still have this system despite all the disturbances and intentional and unintentional harms on the language. It's because, you see, if you have a language like English, and then you want to change a word in it, very easily you can, and when it gets popularized and accepted, then it becomes part of the language. But let's say you want to change the word here, but it goes back to a jerk, and then hundreds of other words also come out from the same jerk. That means you have to alter hundreds of or maybe thousands of words just because you want to change one thing in the dictionary, right? So that is not something that a natural environment can perform, and it is also not something that a conscious person who wants to destroy the language is willing to take up as a job, because it's too much work for too little to gain. So that's all about grammar. Now you understand why I'm not a good friend of grammar and why I have a very bad opinion about it, because grammar masquerades like the science of language, and look what it is. It's nothing. It doesn't even explain why we say things the way we say. It just tells us how to say it. But if you just learn the rest of the language, don't you know all this part? Of course you do, right? So now I hope it is clear for you what the universal linguistic platform is. And when we are a child, we are children, we can naturally learn a language using the ULP. And we don't make the mistake of storing linguistic data in our memory for further analysis and comparison and all that we do later when we are adult. Child doesn't do that. Just come across something connecting to language, straight away his ULP will integrate it into its growing linguistic system. And a child can, same time, develop different systems and learn several different languages at the same time. His mother's, his father's, and maybe his nanny's language at the same time as he's growing up. But then later we lose this ability, unfortunately. And it is not the only thing we lose as we grow up. I remember I was quite good at multitasking when I was a kid, but now I really have a problem with it. If I focus on something, I can't have mind for another thing at the same time. And our physical body is also same. It's constantly losing things that we took granted as children. Our flexibility, our energy, excess of energy, and all this. Health also, yeah. Imagination is another one. In the Korean society, you can observe the children are full of imagination, but when you look at the adults at the age of 40 and above, you don't see any of it. So environments also make us lose things faster or slower. Now, a language is not based on grammar. It's based on many other systems, because the purpose of the language is for consciousness to deal with the world. And for that, the best system for consciousness is the systems that it notices in the world, or it learns in the world. Because through those systems, the language of the consciousness can honestly express what consciousness means in this world. And when we separate language from that, that means we cut the tree here, and then we have a floating language that connects nothing to real, then we just do a great harm to our consciousness.